Hello and welcome to Lesson 6 of the Python Crash Course. Once again, my name is Sam, and these courses were brought to you by Banana Chip Tech. Today we're going to be discussing functions. Functions allow computer scientists to define a set of instructions and then reuse these instructions throughout a program. Let's talk to an example of functions in real life, brushing our teeth. To brush our teeth, there are specific steps that we must follow in order to successfully brush our teeth. We have to take out our toothbrush, we have to wet the toothbrush, we have to take out our toothpaste, to put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, to put the toothbrush in our mouth, swivel our toothbrush around in our mouth for a minute, take the toothbrush out of our mouth, rinse the toothbrush, put everything away. So instead of talking through all of these steps every time we want to brush our teeth, we can simply refer to the collection of these steps as brushing our teeth. In other words, these steps collectively together make the brushing our teeth function. Executing these set of instructions can happen at any time by referring to the brushing our teeth function. I could execute the brush teeth function in the morning, in the evening, after I eat, or at any other random time in the day, and these instructions would all perform the action the same way. By giving these sets of instructions a name, brush teeth, I can refer to the entire set of instructions instead of having to explain the steps one by one. The brush teeth function illustrates the usefulness of functions in programming. By grouping a set of related instructions together under the umbrella of a function, code can be reused at any time by simply calling the function. Function usage has multiple benefits. First, reusability. Code can be reused by simply just calling the function. So for instance, we can call the brush teeth function whenever we want. Those set of instructions are still the same. Second, conciseness. Code that effectively uses functions is more concise than code that does not. So for instance, if we want to perform the same operation 10 times, by defining that in a function, we've reduced the amount of code we have to write in order to accomplish the same task. And so we can just call the function and not have to worry about retyping out the same set of instructions multiple times. So therefore, the code is much more concise. And then finally, code separation. Code can be separated into functions, which helps with the organization of code. This makes reviewing code and debugging much, much easier. Let's take a look at the components required to define a function. The def keyword is used to define a function. It is required whenever you are trying to create a function. After the def, the name of our function goes next. So you can see this name of this function is myCoolFunction. The name of your function must comply with the same rules that govern your variable names. So to be safe, try to restrict your variable names to using letters and underscores, and only use numbers at the end of your variable name. After the name of the function, parameters are listed between the parentheses. So between these parentheses, you can place the names of any parameters you would like. While these names right here, when we're defining it, are called parameters, the actual information passed into the function are referred to as arguments. And the final component of the function is down here is the return statement. So the return statement is not required when creating a function, but it allows us to return information contained in the function back out to where the function was called. So we look at this example here where we call the function, we can see that to call the function, we simply say the name of the function, parentheses, then the arguments, remember they're arguments now because we're passing them into the function and not parameters where we're listing them out here. So the arguments that are being passed into the function, and we're simply doing that. And then this return statement will return this information back out to us, and we can save that information back out to a variable using this equal sign. As we talked about earlier, the power of these functions stem from their ability to hold self-contained instructions. And so ideally, when you program with functions, you should try to restrict your input coming into the function to the arguments that you're passing into the function, and restrict the output going out of your function to either print statements within the function or return statement. So let's go ahead and jump into our programming section. So today is going to be the first day in a long time that we're going to not delete the information provided to us when we create our PyCharm project. Woohoo! So let's go ahead and break down, now that we're talking about functions, what exactly is going on here in this sample Python script that PyCharm provides to us whenever we create a new project. So if you are probably familiar by now, this looks like a function. So we are creating a function here that says def print high. So the name of this function is print high, and then name is going to be the parameter for this function. And what this function is going to do is it's just going to print hi out to the screen. So this is another way of doing string injection. And so if we go ahead and do this print, we see that we get hi PyCharm. We can try and change this. So I'll put in my name, and we can see that, whatever we pass into this function, the operations that the function performs is going to stay the same, but the information that we're passing in will cause the function to do something a little differently. And so that's the power of passing in arguments to a function in order to do something. So now let's jump into what this part is with line number 13. If name equals main. And so this is a little strange, right? This doesn't look like something that we've seen before. We know what this if statement means, right? We've had our tutorial on conditionals. We know that if checks to see if a condition is true or false. This is the operation that will be performed if this condition is met. So our next question is, what is this underscore name, and what is this underscore name main? And so the short answer is this operation basically checks to see if this file that we're in is the main file that is being executed by Python. So the idea is whenever we click our run button here, we're running this file. And so because we're telling Python, hey, I want you to go and run this specific file, the name of this file that's stored in the name variable is going to be the main file, basically, that it's running. Now notice that our name of our file doesn't necessarily have to be main. We could call our file whatever we want. The important thing is that our file is the file that Python will be running. So for instance, that is, we tell Python, hey, I want you to run this code. Python is going to be like, okay, I'm looking at this one file. And if it knows that it's looking at that one file, it will store in that name variable underscore main. And so that's why when we do this condition, it's going to be true if the file that we're running is the file that we're telling Python to run. Okay, so let's work through an example of creating a function. Before we create the function, let's write out some comments for what our functions do. So today, let's do an add 10 function. So the goal of the function is to, with a argument passed in, add 10 to the argument and return it. All right. And so we'll make sure that the argument that we pass in is an int argument. So we want to make sure that that is the case. So let's go ahead and get into our function declaration, right? So our function, creating the function. So to define the function, we have to use our def keyword. So we'll call this add 10, our add 10 function. We'll put our parentheses and we'll say users int. Okay, so this is our parameter right here, our users int parameter that we're going to be using throughout our function. So within our users int, within our function, we can set users int equal to users int plus 10, and then return that back out to the user. Now to run the function, all we have to do is call the add 10 and pass in a number. And we'll say saved result, and we'll print that saved result out to the screen. So let's go ahead and run it and see what we get. And notice that we get 20, which is the answer that we were looking for. If we change this to 100, we should get 110. If we change this to negative 30, we should get negative 20. Now if we type in 40, we're going to get an error because the variable type that we passed in was not the one that we needed for this program. And so it's important to make sure that when you're doing this, to keep in mind your different types of variables, like we talked about in our earlier tutorials, when you're doing this type of stuff. Okay, so one of the cool things about Python is that we can pass in what's called a default argument. So sometimes what happens is we don't want to, pass in an argument and keep typing out the argument because most of the times we run the function, the argument is going to be the same. So for example, we can say this is the add 10 function. We want to change this function to say add x, and we can set x as what we're adding to the int. Now, originally this is the add 10 function, so we're going to normally add 10 to the to the integers that the user passes in. So we can set a default parameter called x and set that equal to 10 here in this function declaration. And so now if I don't tell it if I don't give it, two arguments to pass in, it will still work the same way. Oh, let's change it back. There we go. And so now, you can notice that we get 50 and it still works. Now I can still pass in another argument, so I can say, let's say we're going to add 3 instead of add 10, and we get, wrong place. Let's say we add 3. We can pass it in, we get 43. Now, another thing we can do is we can do named parameters. What named parameters do are basically saying that we have our parameters up here. When we pass in the argument, we'll tell it where it's supposed to go. So normally what Python is going to do is it's going to assume that the arguments that you're passing in are in the order that you want them to be in. So it's going to think, 40 is going to be user's int, 3 is going to be x. But what I can do is I can do the opposite, where I can set x equal to 40 and user's int equal to 3. But you noticed that we still get the same answer. And if I get rid of that, we're going to get an error because we're missing the user's int variable. So that wraps up the end of this tutorial. I hope that made sense and was useful. I'll see you next time, and thanks again for watching.